My manager, Brecken, didn't even look up from the schedule when he said it. "You're on shift Sunday. If you don't show up, don't bother coming back." I stared at him, my graduation cap still clutched in my hand from showing him the ceremony time. He'd asked me to bring proof, like I was lying about finishing college while working his double shifts. And now he was scribbling my name across an 8-hour Sunday shift, humming to himself as if he wasn't ripping away the moment I'd worked 4 brutal years for. My voice cracked when I finally found words. "Brecken, that's my graduation." He shrugged, offering the kind of smile people give when they know they've pinned you against a wall and you have nowhere to go. "Then you'd better hurry after the ceremony. The store needs you more than some." Ceremony. The way he said ceremony, like it was nothing, like it was a child's birthday party I could skip, made my chest burn. I felt my face go hot with rage, humiliation, and disbelief all colliding at once. I wasn't asking for a vacation. I wasn't trying to get out of work. I just wanted to walk across a stage and hear my name called. For once in my life, just once. I tried to reason with him, my voice shaking. "I gave you 3 weeks' notice. I put it in writing. I showed you the ceremony schedule." Brecken leaned back in his chair, that smirk never leaving his face. "And I'm telling you the store needs coverage. You're one of my most reliable employees, Leora. I can't just let you take the day off when we're short-staffed." Short-staffed because he'd scheduled Taylor and Garrick, his favorites, off for the entire weekend. I'd seen the schedule. They were going to some concert 2 hours away, and he'd approved their time off without hesitation. But my graduation, that was apparently too much to ask. I held back tears as I walked away from his office, my hands trembling. In the break room, I heard 2 coworkers whispering. "He always does this to the quiet ones," one of them said. "Anyone who won't fight back, he just walks all over them." The other one laughed bitterly. "Leora's way too nice. She'll probably just skip her graduation and come in." Their words stabbed at me. Was that really who I was? Someone so easy to dismiss that even my coworkers expected me to give up everything. My name is Leora Reyes, and I've never had anything handed to me in my entire life. I put myself through college on night shifts and tips that barely covered groceries and textbooks. I was the kid who studied in the back room during 15-minute breaks because home was too chaotic to focus, too loud with my mom's medical equipment and my siblings' constant noise. I didn't have a cheering section waiting for me at ceremonies. I didn't have family saving seats in the auditorium or planning celebration dinners. I had me, just me, and this graduation was supposed to be the one moment where all that effort wasn't invisible. 4 years of exhaustion, of falling asleep over textbooks, of choosing between buying lunch or buying the required reading. 4 years of professors who didn't know I worked full-time, of coworkers who didn't know I was in school. 4 years of being told I was reaching too high, that people like me don't finish degrees. And I'd done it anyway. I'd finished. That diploma had my name on it, and nobody was supposed to be able to take that moment from me. But standing there in that break room, listening to people assume I'd just give in, something shifted inside me. No, he doesn't get to take this from me. Not this time. I remembered the day I'd been hired, about a year and a half earlier. I'd needed the job desperately, and Brecken had seemed almost kind during the interview. "We need someone dependable," he'd said. "Someone willing to work hard and be flexible with scheduling." I'd been so grateful for the opportunity. I'd promised him I'd be that person, reliable, hardworking, always available. And I had been. I'd covered every shift people called out from. I'd stayed late when he needed someone to close. I'd come in early when morning shifts were understaffed. I'd worked holidays, weekends, and overnight inventory sessions. At first, Brecken had praised me constantly. "You're exactly what this store needs, Leora," he'd say. "I wish everyone had your work ethic." But somewhere along the way, that praise had turned into expectation. Then expectation had turned into entitlement. He stopped asking if I could cover shifts and started just scheduling me for them. He stopped saying thank you and started getting annoyed when I mentioned having school commitments. "You're dependable, Leora," he'd said just last month when I'd tried to reduce my hours for finals week. "Too dependable to let the team down now." Too dependable. Like being reliable was somehow a trap I'd walked into willingly. The favoritism had started small, but by now it was impossible to ignore. Brecken gave flexible shifts to Taylor and Garrick, his favorites who could do no wrong in his eyes. They got weekends off whenever they asked. They got the prime afternoon shifts that weren't too early or too late. They got away with showing up late, leaving early, and spending half their shifts on their phones. Meanwhile, I was always scheduled for the worst hours, opening shifts that required me to be there at 5 in the morning, closing shifts that didn't end until midnight, split shifts that forced me to come in twice in one day with awkward gaps in between. And any time I tried to request time off, Brecken would sigh dramatically and talk about how difficult it was to run a store when people weren't committed to their jobs. Just last week, Taylor had joked about it while we were restocking shelves. "You're basically his doormat," he'd said, laughing like it was funny. "He knows you won't say no, so he just dumps everything on you." I'd forced a smile, pretending it didn't bother me. But it did. It ate at me every single day, the unfairness of it all. The way I worked twice as hard for half the respect. There had been another moment like this, 6 months earlier. A scholarship interview that could have covered my entire final year of tuition. The kind of opportunity that would have changed everything for me. That would have meant I could finally breathe without constantly calculating whether I could afford to eat that week. I'd requested the day off 2 weeks in advance, explained how important it was, even offered to work a double shift the day before to make up for it. Brecken had approved it. Or at least I'd thought he had. The day before the interview, he'd called me in a panic. "We have a situation. I need you to come in tomorrow. It's an emergency." There was no emergency. When I'd arrived, missing my interview, my one shot at that scholarship, I'd found the store adequately staffed and Brecken sitting in his office playing games on his phone. He'd shrugged when I'd asked what the emergency was. "Oh. That worked itself out, but since you're here, might as well stay for your shift." I'd cried in my car during my break. I'd promised myself never again. I'd sworn I wouldn't let him manipulate me into sacrificing something important. And yet, here I was, facing the exact same situation. Only this time, the stakes felt even higher. That night, I went home and did something I should have done months ago. I researched labor laws, employee rights, scheduling practices. I needed to know if what Brecken was doing was just morally wrong or actually illegal. What I found was complicated. Employers weren't required to give time off for graduations. That part was legal. What I also found was that retaliatory scheduling, deliberately giving someone difficult schedules after they'd made a request for time off, could be considered a hostile work environment under certain conditions. And scheduling someone for a shift after they'd given reasonable notice about an important life event, then threatening termination if they didn't show up. That walked a very thin legal line, especially if there was a pattern of this behavior. I printed out the employee handbook policies. I saved screenshots of the scheduling patterns showing how Taylor and Garrick consistently got their requested days off while mine were consistently denied. I documented the timeline showing how I'd submitted my graduation date in writing 3 weeks in advance. I wasn't sure what I'd do with all this documentation, but I knew I needed it. I knew that going into any confrontation with Brecken without evidence would just be my word against his, and his word carried more weight in the company's eyes. The next morning, I approached Brecken during his break with my printed policies and documentation. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice calm and professional. "I want to revisit the conversation about Sunday," I said. "According to the employee handbook, we're supposed to submit time-off requests at least 2 weeks in advance for important personal events, which I did. And according to the scheduling policy, managers should make reasonable accommodations when possible." Brecken looked at the papers I'd brought, then up at me, and then he laughed. Actually laughed like I'd just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Are you seriously trying to lawyer talk me right now?" he said, loud enough that other employees glanced over. "Let me make this simple for you, Leora. You can either show up for your shift on Sunday or you can find another job. What are you gonna do? Quit?" His words hung in the air, challenging me, but I noticed something else too. Through the break room doorway, someone was listening. Someone was watching this entire exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. I didn't know it then, but that witness would matter more than I could have imagined. After my shift that day, Vesper, a coworker I'd always been friendly with but never really close to pulled me aside in the parking lot. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" she asked, glancing around like she was worried someone might overhear. We sat in her car and she took a deep breath before speaking. "I heard what Brecken said to you today about your graduation." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. "He did the same thing to me last year," Vesper said quietly. "My little sister's wedding. I was supposed to be a bridesmaid. I'd requested the day off months in advance, and he'd approved it. Then the week before, he scheduled me anyway and told me if I didn't show up, I'd be fired. My heart sank. What did you do? I went to the wedding, she said. And when I came back, he cut my hours so severely that I almost had to quit anyway. Eventually, I just stopped fighting him, learned to keep my head down. She looked at me with something like regret in her eyes. But watching him do it to you and seeing you actually stand up to him with those policies, I realized I should have fought back. And if you decide to take this further, I'll back you up. You're not imagining it, Leora. He does this on purpose. He targets people he thinks won't fight back. The next day, I called the HR hotline listed in the employee handbook. A man named Oren answered, sounding bored and distracted. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, the graduation request, the denial, the threat of termination, the pattern of retaliatory scheduling. There was a long pause after I finished. So you're saying you can't come to work because of a personal event? Oren said slowly. That's unfortunate, but managers do have discretion over scheduling to meet business needs. But I gave 3 weeks' notice, I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. And there's a pattern of him denying my requests while approving others for the same types of events. Another pause. I understand your frustration, but we can't intervene at the store level for every scheduling disagreement. These matters are handled by individual managers who understand their store's specific needs. It was like talking to a wall that was pretending to care, but was really just reading from a script designed to protect the company from liability. I felt utterly alone in that moment, more alone than I'd felt in years. Then Oren said something that made my ears perk up. Brecken handles his own attendance issues, always has. The way he said it, weary, almost resigned, made me think this wasn't the first complaint about Brecken that HR had dismissed. That evening, Vesper sent me a text. Can you meet me before shift tomorrow? I have something to show you. When I arrived early the next day, she was waiting in her car with her phone out. I've been in a group chat with some former employees, she explained. People who worked here before you started. I asked them about Brecken and... She showed me her phone. Screenshot after screenshot of old messages dating back over 2 years. He made me miss my mom's surgery, one message said. Told me if I didn't come in, I'd be fired. I was there for 3 months after that before I finally quit. Another. He scheduled me during my son's first birthday party. I'd put in the request 2 months in advance. He approved it, then changed the schedule the day before and claimed he'd never approved anything. And another. He made me miss my sister's wedding. I was supposed to be the maid of honor. When I went anyway, he cut my hours from 30 a week to 10 until I had to find another job. There were at least a dozen messages like this, all describing the same pattern. Brecken would target certain employees, usually quiet ones, usually ones who needed the job desperately, and deliberately sabotage important personal events to assert control over them. I made my decision that night, sitting alone in my tiny apartment with my graduation gown hanging on the back of my door. I would attend my graduation no matter what happened. I'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let Brecken take this moment from me. But I wouldn't quit. Not yet. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of forcing me out the way he'd forced out so many others. I would let him make the next move, and I would document everything. Every text, every schedule change, every threat. Because now I knew this wasn't just about me. This was about a pattern of abuse that had been going on for years, with HR either unwilling or unable to stop it. If I walked away quietly, he'd just do it to the next person, and the next, and the next. Someone had to stand up to him. Someone had to say enough. 2 days later, Brecken posted a passive-aggressive memo on the break room bulletin board. Recent discussions about attendance have created negativity in our workplace. Remember, your job is a privilege, not a right. The team counts on your commitment. Everyone knew it was about me. I could feel their eyes on me as I read it, some sympathetic, some judging. But I held my head high and went about my shift like nothing had changed. My graduation gown arrived in the mail 3 days before the ceremony. I opened the package in my apartment alone and pulled out the black fabric. It was heavier than I'd expected, more substantial. I held it up to my chest, looking at myself in the mirror, and something broke inside me. I cried. Not sad tears, but complicated tears, joy mixed with fear, mixed with exhaustion, mixed with determination. This was supposed to be my moment. This was supposed to be the day I proved to everyone who'd ever doubted me that I could do it. The professors who'd said I'd never finish while working full-time. The high school guidance counselor who'd suggested community college was more realistic for someone in my situation. My own family members who'd questioned whether a degree was worth going into debt over. I'd finished despite all of them, despite the exhaustion and the poverty and the constant struggle. And now my manager was trying to take even this small victory from me. My phone buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. A text from Brecken. Shift changed for Sunday. Store opening now. 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. Mandatory. Confirm receipt of this message. My ceremony started at 11. There was no way I could do both. I stared at that text for a long time, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment where I had to choose between keeping my job and attending my own graduation. Part of me wanted to just give in, to text back okay and figure out some way to make it work, but I knew there was no making it work. Brecken had specifically scheduled me for hours that would overlap with my ceremony. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. I took a screenshot of the message. Then I typed out my response, deleting and rewriting it several times before I finally settled on. I'll be attending my graduation ceremony as previously discussed. I can work a shift later that day if needed, but I won't be available from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Professional, calm, clear. His response came within minutes. Then consider this your notice. If you're not here at 5 a.m. Sunday, don't bother coming back at all. I read his words over and over, my hands shaking. He'd actually done it. He'd actually fired me, or threatened to fire me, via text message because I wanted to attend my own graduation. I saved screenshots of the entire conversation. Then I did something I'd been too afraid to do before. I forwarded the screenshots to Vesper with a message. He just fired me for going to my graduation. I'm going anyway. The next day at work, I was moving through my shift like a ghost, trying to process everything that had happened, when someone approached me. Lucan. I'd barely talked to him before. He worked different shifts than me, usually just passing through during manager meetings. I knew he was related to someone higher up in the company, but I'd never paid much attention to the gossip about who exactly. "Hey, Leora," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Can I talk to you for a second?" We stepped outside to the loading dock, away from security cameras and curious ears. "I overheard Brecken on the phone earlier," Lucan said, his expression serious. "He was talking to someone about finally getting rid of the graduation girl. Is that you?" My stomach dropped. "Yeah, that's me." Lucan shook his head, looking disgusted. "This is exactly what he did to 2 other employees last year. My father, he's the district supervisor. He's been hearing complaints about Brecken for months. But every time someone reports something, Brecken covers his tracks or the employee quits before anything can be investigated." He paused, seeming to make a decision. "I'll be there Sunday at your graduation, trust me." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Just trust me," he said again. "Go to your ceremony, I'll handle the rest." Sunday morning arrived cold and gray. I woke up at 6, my stomach in knots, and put on my graduation gown. My hands shook as I adjusted my cap in the mirror. My mom had called the night before. She couldn't attend the ceremony because of her medical issues, because the auditorium wasn't wheelchair accessible, because everything was always just slightly out of reach for people like us. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she'd said, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it. You finished." But standing there alone in my tiny apartment, getting ready to attend my own graduation without a single family member present, I felt empty, lost, like I was about to walk across a stage into nothing. My phone started vibrating around 8:30. Messages from Brecken, one after another. "Where are you? You were supposed to be here at 5. Answer your phone. Get here now or you're done. I'm writing you up for job abandonment. This is your final warning." I silenced the phone and slipped it into my purse. Then I drove to the ceremony venue, my heart pounding, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life by choosing this moment over the job I desperately needed. The ceremony started at 11. I sat in the back with other graduates whose last names started with R, all of us dressed identically in black gowns and caps. Around me, people were taking selfies, laughing with friends and family, excited about the moment we'd all been working toward. I felt separate from all of them, isolated by the choice I'd been forced to make. My phone kept buzzing in my purse, more messages from Brecken. I didn't look at them. When they called my section to line up, I stood with the others and filed toward the stage stairs. My legs felt weak. My vision seemed too bright, too sharp, like everything was happening in high definition. This was it. This was the moment I'd sacrificed everything for. As I climbed the steps to the stage, I scanned the audience out of habit, looking for a familiar face even though I knew there wouldn't be one. And then I saw him, Lucan, standing in the very back of the auditorium holding a sign with my name on it, Leora Reyes, decorated with stars and exclamation points like I was someone worth celebrating. He was filming on his phone, and when our eyes met, he smiled and gave me a thumbs up. I almost cried right there on the stage. Someone had shown up for me. Someone had actually shown up. They called my name. Leora Maria Reyes. I walked across that stage feeling like I was floating. The dean shook my hand, handed me my diploma, and I turned to face the audience. In that sea of strangers, I found Lucan again. He was cheering, waving that ridiculous sign, acting like I was the only graduate who mattered. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like maybe I wasn't invisible after all. After the ceremony, I found Lucan waiting outside the auditorium. "Congratulations," he said, and he seemed genuinely happy for me, like my success somehow mattered to him even though we barely knew each other. "Thank you," I said, my voice shaking. "Thank you so much for coming. You have no idea what it meant to see someone there." "You earned this," he said simply, "and I got something you need to see." He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photos. My heart stopped as I processed what I was looking at. "After you left for your ceremony, I went to the store," Lucan explained. "I wanted to document what happened when you didn't show up." The photos showed the store at different times throughout the morning. The first image showed confused employees arriving for shifts. The next showed customers waiting while shelves went unstocked. And then the crucial image, Brecken's empty office, taken at 9:15 a.m. Time-stamped. "He wasn't there," Lucan said, and I could hear the anger in his voice. "Brecken scheduled you for a shift he knew was going to be chaotic because of understaffing. He threatened to fire you if you didn't show up, and then he didn't show up himself." I stared at the photos, my mind reeling. "He scheduled himself off? His name isn't on the schedule for today at all," Lucan confirmed. "Which means he deliberately created a staffing crisis, blamed you for it preemptively, and then wasn't even there to manage the situation he'd created." He showed me more photos. The shift had collapsed by 10:30. Customers were complaining to the assistant manager, who looked overwhelmed and confused. Employees were texting each other trying to figure out what to do. The entire morning had been chaos. "Corporate received multiple complaints," Lucan continued. "From customers about poor service. From employees about inadequate staffing and management, all time-stamped during a period when Brecken wasn't even in the building." He looked at me seriously. "I sent all of this to my father, the district supervisor, along with a full report. He's been waiting for concrete evidence of Brecken's misconduct. This is it." My legs felt weak. This was bigger than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about my graduation anymore. The district supervisor, Lucan's father, whose name was Kieran, called me personally that evening. "Ms. Reyes, I want to start by apologizing that you were put in this situation," he said, his voice formal but kind. "My son has provided me with extensive documentation of what occurred. I'm treating this as a serious matter requiring immediate investigation." He asked me to provide a formal statement detailing everything that had happened. Every request I'd made, every denial I'd received, every threat Brecken had made. "I'll need you to submit everything in writing," Kieran said. "Emails, text messages, schedule screenshots, anything that documents the pattern of behavior you experienced." I stayed up most of that night compiling everything. The email I'd sent 3 weeks ago formally requesting the day off. Brecken's verbal response that I'd followed up with a written summary. The schedule changes that had progressively made my shift times worse. The text messages from yesterday threatening termination. Screenshots from Vesper showing former employees' experiences. Photos Lucan had taken showing Brecken's absence during the crisis he'd created. By morning, I had a document that was over 20 pages long. Not because I was embellishing, just because there was so much evidence of misconduct when you actually looked at the pattern. I submitted it all through the formal HR portal, this time bypassing Oren and going straight to the district level. 2 days later, Oren from HR called me back. His tone had completely changed from our first conversation. "Ms. Reyes, I want to apologize for my earlier response to your concerns," he said, sounding genuinely uncomfortable. "I should have taken your complaint more seriously and escalated it appropriately. We're now conducting a full investigation into the scheduling practices and management conduct at your location." He asked me to provide an official statement, which I did. I presented everything I'd already sent to Kieran: the text messages from Brecken, the retaliatory schedule changes, the original HR dismissal I'd received from Oren himself, the screenshots Vesper had provided from former employees. There was a long silence on the other end of the line after I finished detailing everything. "This is much worse than we thought," Oren finally said quietly. "We had one previous complaint about this manager, but the employee quit before we could fully investigate. With your documentation and the additional evidence that's been provided, we're seeing a clear pattern of misconduct." He explained that corporate was launching a comprehensive investigation. They'd be interviewing every current and former employee who'd worked under Brecken within the past 3 years. They'd be reviewing all scheduling records, all time-off requests, all HR complaints that had been filed and dismissed. "This may take a few weeks," Oren said, "but I want you to know we're taking this seriously now." The corporate investigation moved quickly. Within a week, investigators had interviewed nearly everyone who'd ever worked at our store. Patterns emerged that were even more damaging than I'd realized. Multiple employees reported retaliation for requesting time off. Several described a hostile work environment where Brecken played favorites openly and punished anyone who questioned his decisions. 2 former employees came forward with stories nearly identical to mine: important life events deliberately sabotaged, threats of termination, constructive dismissal. The investigators found scheduling records that showed clear bias. Taylor and Garrick had received approval for 95% of their time-off requests over the past year. My approval rate was 12%. The disparity was statistically impossible to explain as anything other than deliberate discrimination. They found text messages in company systems showing Brecken coordinating with other managers about problem employees who asked for too much and needed to be managed out. My name appeared in several of these conversations. As all this evidence mounted, Brecken grew increasingly paranoid and erratic. He started showing up to work late, leaving early, snapping at employees over minor issues. He knew something was happening, but he didn't know exactly what or how bad it was. He tried calling me several times. I didn't answer. 3 weeks after my graduation, corporate called a mandatory meeting at the store. Every employee was required to attend, and District Supervisor Kieran would be present. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, not knowing what to expect. The meeting room was tense and silent. Brecken sat at the front, trying to look confident but failing. His leg bounced anxiously under the table. When Kieran walked in, followed by 2 corporate HR representatives, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Thank you all for coming," Kieran began. "We've completed our investigation into management practices at this location, and I want to share our findings." He pulled up a presentation on the screen, timeline after timeline showing scheduling disparities, denied time-off requests, retaliatory actions. My name appeared frequently, but so did others: Vespers, former employees. On May 19th, Manager Brecken deliberately scheduled an employee during her college graduation ceremony despite 3 weeks advance notice, Kieran said, showing the exact text messages on screen. He then threatened termination if she attended her ceremony, and on the day in question, he failed to report to work himself, creating the very staffing crisis he'd blamed on her. Brecken's face went pale. "That's not I can explain. Can you explain these photos showing your office empty at 9:15 a.m.? Kieran asked calmly, displaying Lucan's time-stamped images. "Can you explain why you scheduled yourself off while threatening an employee with termination for doing the same?" Silence. Brecken looked around the room desperately, finding no support. "Step outside, please, Brecken," Kieran said quietly. "Now." Brecken left the room, and Kieran continued the meeting without him. Effective immediately, Brecken is being terminated from his position for multiple violations of company policy, including harassment, retaliation, creating a hostile work environment, and falsifying time records. He looked around at all of us. Additionally, Oren from HR is receiving disciplinary action for failing to properly escalate employee complaints. We're implementing new procedures to ensure that future concerns are taken seriously from the first report. Several employees looked shocked. A few looked relieved. Vesper caught my eye from across the room and nodded, something like gratitude in her expression. After the meeting ended, people approached me quietly. "Thank you for not giving up," one woman said. "He made my life hell for months. I'm glad someone finally stood up to him." "You probably saved the next person he would have targeted," another coworker added. I hadn't done this for gratitude or recognition. I'd done it because it was right, because someone needed to stop the pattern. But hearing their thanks, understanding that my refusal to be silent had actually made a difference, that meant something. Kieran approached me as others were filing out. "Ms. Reyes, do you have a moment?" My heart started racing again. Of course. We stepped into the office that used to be Brecken's. It felt strange being in there without him, without that constant tension and anxiety his presence created. "I want to offer you something," Kieran said. "We have an opening for a full-time administrative coordinator position at the district level. It's stable hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Full benefits including health insurance and tuition reimbursement if you decide to pursue further education." He named a salary that was nearly double what I'd been making on retail hourly wages. I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "You demonstrated courage, integrity, and exceptional documentation skills throughout this process," Kieran continued. "Those are qualities we value in administrative roles. You'd be working with HR compliance, helping to develop and implement better policies to prevent situations like this from happening in other stores." "Yes," I managed to say. "Yes, I accept, thank you." 2 weeks later, I walked through the store one last time as an hourly employee. I was collecting my things, saying goodbye to coworkers, preparing to start my new position. The store felt different now, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from everyone. Before I left, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Lucan. "Thank you for showing up for me. You'll never know how much that meant." His response came quickly. "You earned everything that's happening. I just stood in the back and cheered. Congratulations on your graduation, and your new job, and your courage." I walked out of that store into the parking lot, the afternoon sun warm on my face, and I realized something important. No job should ever demand that you shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's insecurity. No manager should have the power to take your important moments away just to prove they control you. And when you stand up for yourself, really stand up, with documentation and courage and determination, the right people will show up beside you and amplify your voice. I'd shown up for my own milestone, and someone had shown up for me. That was worth more than any job I'd almost lost.